Enter the number 1 divided by 0 into any standard calculator, and you will immediately receive an error. Standard arithmetic treats 0 as a nullity, an empty set, or the complete absence of value, which makes division mathematically impossible. Michael Simoneau proposes a different path through Zeroth theory, a formal architectural framework that challenges the root code of mathematics. Simoneau identifies the core system failure in our ontological definition of 0, rather than the division itself. He classifies this flawed assumption as scalar nullity, the belief that 0 is a one-dimensional void plotted as a hollow pit. Zeroth theory instead shifts us to a multidimensional tensor reality, describing relationships and forces across multiple dimensions. Defining 0 as nothing is a system bug that prevents us from seeing the interconnected structure of the mathematical universe. To fix this bug, we replace the void with the plenum, or totality. The plenum is a space that is entirely full of energy, representing the opposite of a vacuum. The apothecary scale provides a physical model for how a 0 state can contain massive energy. When massive opposing forces are perfectly balancing out, the needle locks at 0. 0 serves as the point of maximum structural tension, where all forces converge. Simoneau formally defines this axiom as an active mirror of inverted magnitude, rather than a passive absence. Redefining 0 as the container for all equilibrium requires us to move beyond binary logic and adopt a ternary system. The zeroth system employs a ternary logic, which is a system with 3 possible values: +1, 0, and -1. +1 represents presence, or manifested reality. -1 represents potential, the unmanifested shadow. 0 represents truth, the convergence point where those two states meet. Simoneau demonstrates this trinity through the hand and fingers proof. Holding up 5 fingers gives a count of 5. Closing them into a fist gives a count of 0. However, the hand, the container of the fingers, remains. Classical math focuses on the manifested objects while failing to index the container itself. Mapping this trinity onto a clock face reveals it is a continuous loop rather than a straight line. Indexing the container upgrades the mathematical model from tracking isolated integers to mapping a closed-loop organism. We can now translate these concepts into multilinear algebra, which is the mathematical study of vectors and tensors across multiple dimensions. In standard matrix math, a scalar 0 collapses a system's dimensions, dropping the determinant to 0. A determinant is the value that describes the scaling factor or geometric volume of a matrix. Simoneau uses the negative identity tensor to represent true 0. The negative identity tensor is a matrix that inverts the sign of every value it interacts with. In this translation, 0 becomes the negative identity tensor, or -I. The manifested state of +1 translates into the identity matrix. The identity matrix is a multidimensional one that preserves the state of any data it touches. The negative identity tensor maintains a full-rank structural grid across all dimensions, preserving information that a scalar 0 would normally destroy. Operating as an active geometric object allows 0 to provide the mechanical foundation for solving previously impossible equations. We return to the original division paradox, 1 divided by 0. Under zeroth logic, 1 divided by 0 equals -1. The tensor analog involves extracting the identity matrix from the negative identity tensor. If 0 is the container of everything, removing a manifested object logically leaves behind the inverse space, the potential. This resolution leads directly to the genesis problem. How does a closed container generate physical reality without an external spark? Simoneau describes this through the Ricochet equation, 0 times 0 equals 1. Translated to matrix math, the negative identity tensor multiplied by itself rebounds into the identity matrix. Self-interaction preserves the magnitude of the totality but flips the sign, generating the identity matrix, or presence. Physical existence represents the unavoidable mathematical spark of totality rubbing against its own internal tension. This math provides the blueprint for a new computational architecture called the hash web. The system runs on the outer product, a mathematical operation that takes 2 vectors and generates a higher dimensional matrix. This creates an interaction matrix, defining every valid mathematical relationship between the 3 input states. By forcing every state to multiply against every other state, this matrix serves as the logic gate for a non-binary system. The hash web maintains an active, self-healing mathematical truth by metabolizing these ternary logic states. Scaling out to the human perspective reveals the broader implications of Zeroth theory. Simoneau describes reality as a falling tensor, spiraling smoothly downward like a funnel of water toward a dense, absolute singularity. Categorizing the world into dichotomies, good or bad, here or there, is a product of our limited perspective inside this funnel. The universe is a finite, super-dense point known as the zeroth dimension. The zeroth dimension is a coordinate where all points exist in the same space, compressed into a single point. This is the resolved state of tensor zero. We are traversing the internal, mathematical structure of a perfectly balanced tensor, a reality where connection is the geometry and zero is the active truth.